This is a live reading from the eighth book in the Left Behind series, and this book is called The Mark. The Beast Rules the World, and I am going to be reading chapter 3 today, and I'll begin to read now. Buck awoke at noon, Chicago time, and felt twice his age. As had been true every day since the rapture, he knew exactly where he was. In the past, it was not uncommon to wake up in a foreign city and have to remind himself where he was, who he was, and what he was doing there. No more. Even when exhausted and injured and barely able to function, somehow the self preservation flywheel kept spinning in his otherwise unengaged mind. He had slept soundly, but at the first flutter of his eyelids and that initial glance at his watch, he knew. It all made sense in a ludicrous way. Buck stared at the wall next to an elevator in a bombed out skyscraper in Chicago, heard muffled voices from around the corner, smelled coffee and a baby. Kenny had his own aroma, a fresh, powdery sweetness that Buck conjured when they were far apart. But Kenny was here, barricaded from the outer hallways, exposed to the windows that let in the midday sun. Buck rolled to his back and propped himself up on his elbows. Kenny had apparently given up trying to climb the makeshift barrier and sat contentedly playing with one of his loose shoelaces. "Hey, Kenny Bruce," Buck whispered. "Come see Daddy." Kenny's head jerked up, and then he went to all fours before righting himself and toddling to the bed. "Dada." Buck reached for him, and the chubby bundle climbed atop him and stretched out on his stomach and chest. Buck let his head fall back again and wrapped his arms around Kenny. The boy seldom had the patience to simply rest in his father's arms, but now he seemed almost ready to nap himself. With the baby's tiny heart beating against his own, Buck wished he could lie there forever. "Da-da, bye-bye," Kenny said, and Buck could not stop the tears. Rayford had made a decision, several in fact. After watching the old safe house burn to the ground, he instructed Albie to turn back to Kankakee, where they would fly the GC fighter to Colorado. "Now you're talking, Captain," Albie said. "Now I'm talking," Rayford groused. "Now I'm probably getting us killed." "You're doing the right thing." Unable to reach David in New Babylon, Rayford left a message asking him to get back to them with Hattie's exact whereabouts. He also asked David to inform GC personnel holding her that should their current operation fail, they should keep Hattie there until assigned personnel could come for her. David often overrode other GC systems to send such directives in a way that they could not be traced back to him. He was the one who assigned security codes to keep such transmissions from enemies of the global community, so he was also able to use the channels without detection. "As soon as you can," Rayford recorded on David's private machine. "Get back to Albie and me to confirm you've paved the way for us." Before long, Rayford would have to transmit his picture with his new look and name to David Hassid so the young Israeli could enlist him in the GC peacekeeping forces too. Meanwhile, he and Albie would put down at what was once Peterson Air Force Base, appropriate at GC Jeep David would reserve. Follow his directions to this bunker, if that's what it was, and pick up the prisoner. By the time Albie had stalled his landing until the fighter was short of fuel, Rayford had been dozing more than 2 hours. Albie woke him with the news that they had not yet heard back from David. "Not good," Rayford said, placing yet another call to New Babylon. No answer. "You have a computer, Albie?" "A sub-notebook, but it's got satellite capability." "Programmed to communicate with David? If you've got his coordinates, I can make it work." Rayford found the machine in Albie's flight back. "Batteries are low," he said. "Plug into the plane's power," Albie said. "I don't do heavy-duty stuff on batteries anyway." "Keep the power on after we land," Rayford said. "This could take a while." Albie nodded and got on the radio to the GC outpost. GC NB 4047 to Peterson Tower. You ought to know, we're now Carpathia Memorial GC, came the reply. My mistake, Tower, Albie said. First time here, and I don't know how long. He winked at Rayford, who glanced up from his computer work. Albie had never been in the States before. Gonna have to take the memorial out of our name, aren't we? 4047. Come back? He is risen. Albie rolled his eyes at Rayford. Yeah, I heard. That's something, eh? You're supposed to reply with, he is risen indeed. Rayford pantomimed, sticking his finger down his throat. Albie shook his head. Well, I sure believe that, Tower, he said, glancing at Rayford and pointing up. Business here? Deputy Commander with confidential orders. Name? Marcus Elbaz. One moment. Low on fuel, Tower. Short on people here, Commander Elbaz. Give me a minute. We're putting down either way, Albie told Rayford, who was busy pecking in the details that would orient Albie's computer global positioning hardware to a satellite that would link him directly with David's computer. There you are, sir, the tower said. I see you on the system. Roger. Don't have you assigned out this way, though. You been to Kankakee? That's where I came from. And your business here? Repeat, confidential orders. Oh, yes, sorry. Anything we can help with? Refueling and a ground vehicle should have been arranged. As I say, sir, we don't have your disposition here. We can refuel you, no problem, with the proper authorization code. Ground transportation is scarce. I'll trust you to figure something out. We're very short-handed, and you mentioned that. And frankly, sir, there's no one here near your rank. Then I expect whoever's in command to obey my order for transportation. A long pause. I'll pass that word along, sir. Thank you. And you're cleared to land. David awoke in the Palace Hospital, his head throbbing so he could barely open his eyes. He shared a room with 2 sleeping patients. His clothes had been removed, and he lay there in a flimsy gown, an IV in his hand, his watch on a stand next to him. Holding it before his bleary eyes was almost more than he could bear. 2,100 hours, it couldn't be. He tried to sit up and was aware of bandages around his head and over his ears. He heard his own pulse and felt pain with every beat. It was dark outside, but a silent TV monitor showed pilgrims still in the courtyard, passing by, kneeling, bowing, worshiping, praying to the gigantic statue of Nikolai. On David's other side was the remote control. He didn't want to wake the other patients, but the captioning system was in Arabic. He fiddled with it until it changed to English, and the captions merely represented songs piped into the courtyard as people slowly passed by the image. He stared at the camera, pulled back to show the immense crowd, seemingly as big as for the funeral, snaking a mile outside the palace. David panicked. He had been away from his phone and computer longer than he had been in months. He craned his neck looking for a phone, and the pain nearly drove him to his pillow again. He pulled a cord, connected to the nurse's station, but no one came. He knew the ratio between nurses and patients was ridiculously low, but surely they knew he was a director. That should count for something. However, they were hydrating him was working because he had to relieve himself in a bad way. No bedpan for him. He played with the controls on the side of the bed until one railing lowered. He grimaced as he swung his leg off the side, pausing to let the throbbing subside and catch his breath. Finally, he put both hands on the edge of the bed and eased himself to the floor. The marble was cold for such a hot part of the world, but it felt good. He stood, swaying, dizzy, waiting for his equilibrium to catch up. When he felt steadier, he stepped toward the bathroom, reminded by a tug at his wrist that he was still hooked to the IV. He stepped back and wiggled the metal stand on rollers away from the wall and the end of the bed, but as he dragged it with him, it caught. A monitor cord was plugged into the wall. He tried to remove it, but it wouldn't budge from the connection or the stand. David knew there had to be some simple trick to it. Maybe it was screwed opposite of normal, or you had to push to pull it or something. All he knew was he had to go. Painful as it might be, he yanked at the tape, which pulled hairs on his hand, then pulled the needle out with one motion. The sting brought tears to his eyes, and as the solution dripped on the floor, he made one feeble attempt to turn the stopper, then just tied the cord and headed for the bathroom. Within seconds, he heard the alarm informing the nurse's station that an IV had come loose. He opened the closet on the way back, and though his clothes were there, his phone was not. His mind nearly went blank from pain and fear. Was this the end? Would someone dial back the numbers of the Tribulation Force members who may have tried to reach him? He could have already been discovered. Should he just find Annie and get out of there? What if she was already dead? She would want him to escape and not risk his life in a vain attempt to be sure of her. Not a chance. He would not leave without her or without knowing for sure whether she was dead. What are you doing out of bed? It was not a nurse, but a female orderly. Bathroom, he said. Back to bed, she said. What have you done with your IV? I'm fine, he said. We have bedpans, and I already went. Now just, sir, shh, I can hear you, and so can everyone else on this floor. Your roommates are sleeping. I just need, sir, do I need to get someone in here with restraints? Now quiet down. I am being quiet now. Suddenly, David realized the bandages over his ears made him talk louder. Sorry, he said. I'm Director Hasid. I need to find. Oh, you're the director. Are you a lightning victim? Yeah, I took a bolt right through the top of my head, but here I stand. You don't have to. Sorry. No, I just fainted in the heat and I'm fine. You had surgery? Minor. Now, sir, if you're the director, I'm supposed to tell someone when you're awake. Why? And why had she asked about the lightning? Was Annie a victim, and did they somehow connect him with her? He didn't want his mind to run away with him. I don't know, sir. I just do what I'm told. 6 nurses and 2 aides are handling this whole floor, and some floors have fewer staff than that, so I need to know where my phone is. I carry it with me, and it's not in my uniform. I know you're going to tell me to stay away from my uniform anyway, but on the contrary, sir, you were sponge bathed when you were brought in here, and if you're ambulatory, I think you're supposed to get dressed. You think? This couldn't be right. Something was wrong. David had been sure he'd have to sneak out, but now he was being given the bum's rush. I'll get my supervisor, but you might as well start getting dressed. Can you do it yourself? Of course. But get started then. I'll be right back. Or she will. David had overestimated his strength. He pulled his stuff from the closet and sat in a chair to dress. But he was soon short of breath and dizzier than ever. His whole head felt afire, and it seemed his wound was oozing over both ears. But when he felt under the bandage, he felt nothing. He didn't want to think about the first time that dressing came off. With his uniform on and only socks and shoes to go, David opened the door wider to get light from the hall. He peered into the mirror and shuddered. Still in his mid-20s, with smooth, clear, dark skin and nearly black hair and eyes, he had often been mistaken for a teenager. Never again. When had he aged so? His face looked thin and drawn, and yes, his color lighter. He lowered his head and peeked atop it, where the bandaging evidenced blood and ooze. The outer wrapping extended over his ears and beneath his chin, reminding him of dental patients from old movies. David's head seemed to push against the tight wrapping, and when he gingerly put on his uniform cap, he knew it was more than his imagination. He couldn't be sure how thick the bandages were, but between that and the swelling of his head, his cap rode atop him as if several sizes too small. Any thought of covering the effects of his stitching to avoid attention was hopeless. Maybe he could find a bigger, much bigger cap, but there was no way to hide the wrap that extended under his chin anyway. The supervising nurse knocked gently and stepped in as David was pulling on his socks. She was a bottle blonde, tall and thin, about twice his age. He had to straighten up to breathe and let the pain subside every few seconds. "Let me help you," she said, clearly Scandinavian, kneeling and putting on his socks and shoes and tying them. David was so overwhelmed he nearly wept. Could she be a Christian? He wanted to ask. Anyone with a servant spirit like that was either a believer or a candidate. "Ma'am," he said, trying to remember to talk softly. She looked up at him and he studied her forehead, searching, hoping for the mark of the believer. "None. Thank you." "You're welcome," she said quickly, happy to help and wish I could help more. "If I had my way, you would be with us a couple more days at least, maybe more." "I'd just as soon leave. Oh, I'm sure you would. No one wants to stay, and who can blame them? All the excitement, the resurrection and all. But the potentate has called a meeting of directors and above his office at 2200 hours. You are expected." "I am?" "When his office was told you had succumbed to the heat and had been injured and operated on, we were informed that if you were alive and ambulatory, you were to be there." "I see. I'm glad someone does. You, sir, should be a patient. I wouldn't be running around so soon." "I was told this was superficial, minor surgery." "Minor surgery is an operation on someone. You've heard that, I'm sure. You know a nurse did the procedure. And good as she was pressed into duty." "Do you know who that was?" "I'm pretty sure she was native." "Hannah Palemoon," she said. "I wonder if she's got my phone. It was in my... I doubt it, Director. You'll find your wallet and keys and ID unmolested. We know better than to confiscate things from someone at your level." "I appreciate that, but no one took your phone, sir. Could you have dropped it where you fell, left it in your vehicle?" David cocked his head. "Possibly, but unlikely. He had not been talking on the phone when he fell. Best he could remember, so it would have been in his pocket. Where would I find Nurse Paul? I told you, Director, she would not have your phone, and I'm not going to tell you where she is. We're working 24 on and 24 off here, and she's off. If she's like me, she sleeps the first 12 of those 24 hours off, and she ought to be allowed to." David nodded, but he couldn't wait to get back to his computer and look her up on the personnel directory. "Ma'am, I have to find an employee I'm worried about. Name's Annie Christopher, cargo chief of the Phoenix, but assigned crowd control at Sector 53 today." "That's not good." "So I've heard. Lightning there?" "Bad. Several deaths and injuries. I can check and see if she's in our system." "You might check the morgue." David flinched. "I'd appreciate it if you'd check your system." "I will, sir. Then you had better get to your quarters and relax before your meeting. You know as well as I do you're in no condition to be sitting at a table, thrilling as it may be to meet with a man who is dead this morning and is alive tonight. Follow me." She led him to the nurse's station where she searched the computer. "No Christopher," she said, "but our entries have been hopelessly delayed." "She would have had an employee badge," David said, "and it should have been swiped by a wand." "So the morgue," he said, again trying to cover his emotion. "Look on the bright side," she said. "Maybe she wasn't a victim at all." That would almost be worse, David decided. Why could he not reach her, and why would she not have tried to reach him? Well, maybe she had. He had to find his phone before the meeting. "Nothing," Rayford said. "David hasn't accessed his computer for hours, and I'm getting no answer on his phone. Now it's not even letting me leave a message, as if he's turned it off." "Strange," Albie said. "So Pueblo doesn't even know we're coming. And we're not going if we don't know where it is. We'll find out. You're a resourceful guy, Albie, but I love the impossible, but you're the boss. I need your permission." "What's your plan?" "To find out if your new look and ID work." "Oh boy. Come on, man. Confidence." "The plan, Albie. I'll be the ranking officer down there. I blame the computer delay on all the excitement or the incompetence in New Babylon. Who can argue that? You're with me. If they demand ID, you got it. You're no longer just a civilian helping out, though. You're a recruit, a trainee. Uh-huh. Not only do I insist on a car, but I'll get out of them the location of the bunker. This I've got to see. I love showing off. Rayford slapped Albie's computer shut. Tell me about it. Kenny Bruce tried to tug Bug toward the barrier, as if knowing his dad couldn't get him past it. But Buck was anchored to the bed. He felt as if he'd survived a plane crash. Or hadn't. It was as if his spine was compacted, every muscle, bone, joint, and tendon tender. He sat there trying to muster the strength to rise and stretch and make his way to his wife and the others. Kenny, apparently resigned to patience, climbed onto his father's lap and put a hand on each side of his face. He looked into Buck's eyes and said, Mama? We'll see Mama in a minute, hon, Buck said. Kenny traced Buck's deep facial scars with his stubby fingers. They don't bother you, do they, bud? Dada, Kenny said. Mama? Presently, Buck rose, lifting Kenny as he went. The boy spread his legs and settled in over Buck's hip, his arms around him, head on Buck's chest. Wish I could take you with me everywhere I go, Buck said, limping, stiff-legged and gimpy. Mama? Dada? Yep, we're going, bud. Buck prepared himself for the always embarrassing welcome, save for the last person to rise. But when he came into view of everyone else in the safe house, he was virtually ignored. Leah sat bundled in a robe, leaning back against a wall, dozing, her bleached blonde hair with red roots wrapped in a towel. James stared at the tabletop before him, his head in his hands, a straw in his coffee cup. Tyson stood beside a window out of view from the outside, just in case, head bowed, softly praying. Chloe paced, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming. She looked directly into Buck's eyes as if to let him know she was aware he was there. And when Kenny tried to wriggle down to get to her, Buck whispered, Stay with Daddy a minute. Huh? Chloe was saying, I understand, Zeke. I know, sweetie. I know. God knows. It'll be all right. We'll come get you. Don't you worry, Zeke. God knows. It'll be after dark, but you stay strong, here? She finally rang off, and everybody looked to her. Big Zeke was busted, she said. Zeke Sr.? Tyson asked. Zeke Jr. was much bigger than his father, but still they were known as Big Zeke and Little Zeke. She nodded. GC goons got him in the morning, cuffed him, charged him with subversion, took him away. How'd they miss Zeke Jr.? Buck asked, finally letting Kenny down. Zeke, Kenny said, giggling. Chloe shrugged. Their underground was better hidden than ours, and I don't think little Zeke ever showed his face outside. Zeke, Kenny said. Little Zeke coming here, Leah said. What else? Where else would he go? He says GC is staking out the place, picking up people who stop for gas. How's he know? He's got some kind of monitor rigged up that he used to keep track of his dad. That's how he knew Big Zeke had been arrested. He knows his dad won't give him up, but he always knows he can't stay there. He's packing. Yeah, Buck said. All he'd need is for the GC to find all his files and document making paraphernalia. It will be good to have him here, Tyson said. He will be safe and can do so much for so many. Cameron, how are you feeling? Better than Chame, apparently. The old man lifted his head and tried to smile. I'll be okay, he mouthed through his clenched jaw. No capers for me. Eager to study and learn. Tyson moved away from the window. And me with a student who cannot talk. You must learn and read. You will be an expert about our own people before you know it. God's chosen people. What a thrill to teach it. I will use the same material in my cyber lesson, wherein I expose Carpathia as the Antichrist. Coming right out with it, are you, Buck said. Absolutely, the rabbi said. The gloves are off, as you Americans so like to say. There is no longer any question about him, nor should there be. I am persuaded that Leon is his false prophet, and I will say that too. Those who have ears will not be deceived. It will not be long before the Satan-indwelt beast will take out his rage against the Jews. James held up a hand. Buck could barely make out the labored, muffled question. And what are we to do? We are no match for him. You will see, my friend, Tyson said. You will learn today not only the history of the Jews, but their future as well. God will protect his people now and forevermore. I like being a believer already, James managed. Buck, Chloe said, stepping close to embrace him, we have to plan Zeke's rescue. Just what I need today, another mission. You slept. Don't say that. Well, it's you or me, pal, Chloe said. If you need another day of recoup, I'll be ready, Buck said. I can help, Leah said. I'm fit. Maybe the two of you then, Chloe said. I've got to get news to the co-op. Keep everybody working together. We're going to need a pilot, Buck said. But the GC chopper down right now in the middle of their stakeout chide him for missing a suspect, and we arrest Zeke Jr. and bring him here. What? What's with all the looks? We don't have a chopper today or tonight, hun, Chloe said. Probably not until tomorrow night, and we don't dare risk making Zeke wait that long. Okay, so where's the helicopter and your dad? And Albie? And that's the end of chapter 3. Next, I'll be reading chapter 4, and thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.